How's it, sports fans? Welcome back. This is Moving the Needle podcast. Hey, I got to give you guys a big thank you. You've been really supportive of the YouTube channel. So if you're listening on audio and you prefer to sometimes watch podcasts or watch some clips when you're at home, make sure you go to YouTube, search Moving the Needle podcast. The latest one with Brendog's been firing. So thanks to you guys. And I'm really keen to get into this week's episode because this is really a big part of the history of downhill. Now, some of you might not know the name Mark Rodgers. I certainly did, but it was a little bit before my time. And him and his dad, he'll get into it and he'll probably correct me, but they ran a company called Crank out of Big Bear. And my first year over, I went and stayed with the Aussies in Big Bear. And that was kind of one of the big training grounds in California pre-season because of the weather, the lift access. But speaking of Aussies, if it wasn't for this man and his dad and this company, we might not know the name Nathan Rennie, Chris Kovarik, Johnny Waddell, and before that, I think Scott Sharples and Michael Ronnie, who I looked up to. So, Mark, welcome to the show, and we've been sharing some amazing texts back and forth. So, I think for us, it's pretty fitting that we're going to talk some trash about the early years of downhill in California and the world.
Yeah, for sure. We'll try and keep it PG too, won't we? But good to be here, Andrew. I've been a fan of yours. You and I had never met. This is actually the first time we've ever had face-to-face, but I've been exchanging messages for a little bit, and congrats to you. I mean, I'm a podcast guy. I've been more in the motorcycle world for the last 20 years, and I probably spent too much time listening to podcasts, but what you're doing for downhill mountain biking is rad. I'm a fan. Stoked to be here. Appreciate you giving me and I guess my little story and family and all the great people that you and I actually know a lot, but our intersections were about 2 years apart, it sounds like. So I got out, you got in a couple years later, and we knew a lot of the same people, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we would definitely enjoy sharing a beer. And as you said, podcast. So thanks for the shout out. I just want to bring these stories kind of to the mainstream and give people like just a way of understanding what makes these guys tick, because people just see them hurtling down hills, and I got to know a lot of the guys, and all. Just to me, it's fascinating the backstories and what people go through. So thanks for the props. And like you say, we probably missed each other. I was out there in 2003, and you guys had sort of come and gone just before that, huh?
Yeah, end of 2000. We can get into that when we get into some timeline stuff. End of 2000, we were basically done. 01, we hung around a little bit, but didn't race. Went to the 01 Worlds in Vail, and I didn't go to another mountain bike race until Wyndham 2010.
Okay, I see. Yeah, and I raced that one. That's a pity we didn't get to know that. But let's shed some light on the context of cool. What you do. The company was called Crank. And as I understand it, I remember the gloves mostly and the kit, but you said you did helmets as well, and you backed factory teams like GT. I remember Yeti was on it, so I even remember a lot of it. But give a little like context of the company and how you guys started and sort of from the humble beginnings to making it pretty big in the world of mountain biking and downhill.
Yeah, big, you could say. Thanks, appreciate that. So, I mean, I'll give my dad the credit. My dad came from a motorcycle background. He worked at companies like Oakley way back in the day with Greg LeMond and O'Neill Clothing. He was at O'Neill, which started Azonic. And a lot of people were like, hey, you got to get into mountain biking. You got to get into mountain biking. So my parents made the best decision ever. In 1993, we were down in Orange County. So you would probably spend a lot of time in Orange County too. We grew up in Orange County. And in 1993, my parents said, hey, let's move to Big Bear. And I was a BMX kid. I grew up racing at the Orange Y in Orange County, a famous BMX track. And they took us to Big Bear. And my dad said, hey, I'm going to start a mountain bike clothing accessory company. And I shared with you a little bit. This is a cool little tidbit. Mike Metzger, the freestyle, godfather of freestyle, if you will, he actually raced for my dad at O'Neill. He was a really good up-and-coming pro motocross racer. Mike had gotten injured a lot, and Mike was really good at drawing, as people might have seen with his tattoos and all that. And my dad told him he was starting a company. Mike's like, I want to help. So my dad and Mike and me as a teenager, we went to Cactus Cup 1994 and said, hey, here's what we want to do. Came up with the name Crank, changed the spelling with a Q. A lot of people remember the Q in Crank, not a C. So it was Q. We added a C to the end, and we were off and running. So 94, we created gloves. Right away, we got like GT to use them, and Penny Davidson, a friend of ours from Big Bear who raced downhill for the Evian team. And at that same time, This guy, I want to give him credit because he should get a lot of it. His name's Tony Carson. He's from Australia. He was a motocross racer. He got into downhill mountain bikes. He's riding a mountain cycle. He came to America and he came to Big Bear just like you. Let's go ride. Let's go train. We end up meeting him. My dad loves racing. My dad loves sponsoring. So my dad just sponsored him. We sponsored him that whole year in 94. Tony Carson goes back to Australia, just like you, the seasons, right? The summer and the winter. He goes back to Australia in 94. He comes back over to America in 95. And all of a sudden he has Scott Sharples with him and Michael Ronning with him. And you could kind of say the rest is history from there. But 95 was rad. Ronning won some early races here in the U.S. The first Norma of the year, which, by the way, was a 10-minute downhill race. Ronning won that, which was crazy. And they went off, and Gary Fisher and Trek. And we kept that connection with the Aussies. We loved racing. Big Bear, some would come back over each year. Ronning and Sharples would come back to Big Bear. We'd see them. Business was growing, right? So the crank business, the gloves, we got into jerseys and pants. We partnered with OGK. You might remember OGK on helmets.
I do.
Greg ran OGK helmets for a long time.
Yeah, out of Japan, weren't they?
Exactly.
Or they are now?
Yep. Yep. So we ended up partnering with OGK in 1995. So 1 year into business, we meet OGK, and they're like, we want to get into helmets in America. We're like, we want to get into helmets. So we did a collab. So OGK manufactured, we designed, they designed, we worked together. And in 1996, we came out with our first downhill helmet, called it the Kamikaze, which is named after the famous downhill in Mammoth. We got the Volvo Cannondale team. So by 97, Missy and Miles, Tinker Juarez actually was wearing our cross-country helmet in the Olympics in 96. So it was great. I mean, I'm a teenager in Big Bear, riding downhill all the time, loving life. So by like 97, 98, and stop me if I'm moving too fast. Sometimes I can do that. Any questions you have? I was getting ready to turn pro. I was racing junior downhill in America, winning a lot of the junior expert races. Guys like Gary Houseman and Colin Bailey and those guys that you probably raced more with as they kept going and I left. By 98, I turned pro in 98. At that time, we had a great distributor in Australia, Terry from Earth Cycle in Australia. He's like, I got two good young pros or young guys that want to come to America. One of them is Johnny Waddell. And I don't know if there's a better human on this earth than Johnny Waddell.
Yeah, what a ledge, man.
Yeah, just a good guy. Him and I are still friends to this day. He lived with us for 3 years. So he'd come to Big Bear for 3 years. He raced for us for 3 years. And he'd live in my parents' attic. And we kind of finished it. So Johnny comes over in 98. And this is an important part of the story. He comes over in 98. He was junior, but he just dominated juniors in America. He won like the Mammoth Norma Junior by like 10 seconds. Like, all right, you go pro. So he turned pro. He did the rest of the Norma's pro, was like top 20 at the pros throughout that year. There was another guy named Ben Whitlock who rode pretty good, but he got injured, went back to Australia. The end of that year is where it gets really important. So Johnny goes to Mount St. Anne for the Worlds, 1998 Worlds, Mount St. Anne. Rennie's in Mount St. Anne, 1998. And for people that don't know, Rennie's bike got stolen, and he had to race a borrowed Cannondale production bike, and he got third. So Rennie gets third at the Worlds, 17 years old, 1998.
On a borrowed bike.
Johnny must have borrowed Cannondale production bike. And you asked a question, and we'll get into that later, about the differences between back then and nowadays. Production bikes versus like team bikes and good bikes were night and day difference, right? Because
yeah, 100%.
The bikes were just progressing so fast, whereas now you could go get a Commensal off the shelf or a Scott off the shelf, and they're pretty darn good, kind of like 450 motocross, right? The bikes are just all so darn good. Back then, not the story. So good old Rennie does that. And after that, him and a guy named Mal Dalton, I'll give Mal credit too, they came to Big Bear after that. And like, all right, hey, how you guys doing? Good to meet you. We talked to Johnny. Johnny had gone home, I think. And we're like, what's up with this Rennie guy? Johnny's like, man, he's just faster than me. We're like, what? You're pretty fast. So Rennie comes to Big Bear. As you know, there's lots of those amateur cup races and fall classic races in Big Bear. We're like, hey, why don't you jump on one of our bikes? We were riding Turner bikes at the time. So he jumps on one of our Turners.
Turner. That's, yeah. Now we blast from the past. Yeah, I rode Turner for 2 years there with Sven and Anke. Oh, cool.
Yeah. So he jumps on one of our Turners and wins the pro class at the Big Bear race. We're like, all right. And those Big Bear races back in the day would get good guys, right? Like, people would show up, some local pros and stuff. So we're like, all right, you're pretty good. So then around about that same time, Rennie goes, well, we have this other guy named Chris Kovarik. We're like, another one? Okay. We're like, how good's he? And Rennie's like, he's way faster than me. We're like, come on, dude.
That's so cool of the Aussies. Like, they're kind of, it's quite humble for like Johnny. It's competition, but he's like, you think I'm good? Like, Rennie's
Yeah.
faster. And then Rennie's like, dude, you should see this other guy, Kavarik. That's pretty cool, because they could not mention that and get the ride, right?
Yeah, just keep it all themselves. Yeah. So
You
we hired all
could.
3 of them. So for the next year, we had all 3 of them, right? And we were like, all right, this is cool. Let's go. Let's take the team to another level. Our crank business was doing pretty good. And we're like, all right, let's do this. So 99, we're like, let's do this. We actually sponsored the GT team again with gloves, just with gloves. We hadn't sponsored them for a few years. And we're like, hey, we have this team. We got more Aussies, Chris Kavarik, Chris rode GTs in Australia. And he was riding the Lobo. So we talked about history of the Lobo. And the GT team had ridden Lobos for a couple of years. PD rode some. And they looked pretty cool, but everyone's like, I don't know if they're that good. So GT's like, yeah, we'll sponsor your team. We'll give you all the bikes you want. I mean, they loaded us up with bikes. Well, come to find out, it's because they had a ton of Lobos in stock that they couldn't sell. So they put the factory team on iDrives, which was their new works bike. And again, that comes out that, okay, factory team's on new stuff, better stuff. We're riding these Lobos. But we were stoked. You know, we had GT support at the time. For anyone that doesn't know, GT at the time was probably the biggest bicycle company. They're probably, to what a Specialized or Trek is today, right? That was GT at the time. And they were racing and everything was great. So Kavarik comes over 99. Rennie comes over 99. Waddell's back in 99. And I was racing. My little brother, Jason Cotting, 2 young Americans, were racing the junior class. And we had 6 riders. We had like a 6-rider race team. And if people knew what our budget was, they would laugh.
Well, but I mean, you said you hired the guys, but let's put it all into context. Like, you just gave them a room to stay and travel. Like, you guys were a shoestring budget team, right? You were trying to make it work. You were just doing it for the love and the passion, like between your dad and obviously you were younger back then. But what was the budget? What are we talking? Like
less than $100,000
to have 6 riders and get around all of America.
All over North America, including Canadian World Cups. And we drove in a van. We had a 15-passenger van with a trailer.
Yeah, and the Norbers, you mentioned Norbers, and if some people don't know, that's the North American National Series, and that was borderline almost as good as the World Cups. You had PD coming over, you had Voljos at some of them, like there was TV, there was Chevy trucks at a time, like it was big time. That was like the heyday, right? That was still the heyday during that era, right? 98, 99.
Yep. Yeah, so you had Volvo. So Volvo Cannondale was there for a decade. And they were mainly there for the Norba Series because the Norba Series in America was so big. And for people that may not understand advertising, most companies' budgets are like regionalized, right? Like USA, North America has a budget. Europe has a budget. Australia, Asia maybe has a budget. Africa has a budget. So that Chevy trucks money that was going to GT, that was coming from America because mountain biking was that big in America. GT had a tractor trailer, just like Supercross. GT had a tractor trailer. Volvo Cannondale had a big truck, and I know some of the teams are coming back to that nowadays, which is awesome. I love it. But yeah, it was no joke. The team list along the lines was unreal. So yeah, Norba Racing was really big, and that's probably another podcast for another day on what happened to that, sadly. But it was big racing in America. It was big racing.
Yeah, and like the big guys were pulling in $200,000 contracts. Some of the biggest, your Palmer, your Missy Jovi, they were on fat wage. Like some rumors that maybe Missy was on $1 million. I don't know if that was like 2-year deal, but we're talking about So, but we're talking about these guys coming over, which you'll speak to, zero money in the bank, eating hot dogs because they can't afford food. You guys are doing the best you can. It's not because you're hoarding the money. It's because there just was no money. And you're going to go on to tell us how they sort of cemented themselves in the history of downhill.
For sure. And, we were trying to build our business, Crank, at the time, and Fox was coming in, and Troy Lee was coming in, and these big established motocross companies. I'll be honest with you, like we were barely a couple $1 million company, and we were always, OGK would be like maybe a month or 2 late with helmets. They wouldn't show up in March. They'd show up in May or June. So we'd like miss the start of the season for product. So it was always that, but we loved it. We still love it, right? I watch every World Cup and listen to most of your podcasts and follow everything. So there's nothing like racing. So let's go to the start of 99. The guys show up. We have our bikes. The first Norba's in Big Bear, which most of the year, the Norba National started at Snow Summit Ski Resort in Big Bear, which was awesome. loaded field. I mean, the whole GT team was there. Volvo Cannondale team was there. Yeti team, Specialized team. Palmer was there. Kurt Voorhees was there. Eric Carter. I mean, just 10, 20 guys that were, probably 80% of the World Cup field. Even like Specialized sent probably like David Vasquez over and Oscar Saez, who you had a great podcast with. I mean, those guys were all coming here to America to race. So we go to the first one. Kvarik's getting a little comfy. Waddell's comfy. He's been here before. Rennie don't know the difference. Let's be honest, right? So Rennie shows up at the first one, qualifies top 10, and people are like, huh? Rennie's still 17 years old from Australia. Yes, he got third at the Worlds the year before, but he didn't race anything else. Again, on a borrowed Cannondale the year before. He qualifies top 10. He gets sixth in the final. He's minuscule off of the podium, 17 years old at the first Norma on a team with a shoestring budget in our backyard. I mean, I got some pictures and stuff I'll send you if you want to share some stuff on social.
Definitely,
and
definitely.
We're all just like, this is unreal. But in the background, Kvarik is like, I think Kvarik got 14th. If I remember right, Kvarik got 14th, which for your first race overseas, your first race in America, when the field was so loaded, that's pretty darn good, right? But totally got surpassed. I think he got 14th. Two funny stories about that. So, well, first, he's there at the bottom, and everyone's just looking at him. And it was cool because, like, Sharples was there, Ronnie was there, Sean McCarroll was there, and they all were stoked for him, too. And I think he beat all of them. I don't think any of them got on the podium. And everyone was just super stoked for him. Everyone's happy. We go out to dinner that night in Big Bear, and we go to Denny's, popular spot in Big Bear. And we're all out, us and the Aussies. And Randy orders a steak. He wants a steak from Denny's, which probably is not a good idea to order a steak from Denny's. And the waitress
Unless
goes,
it's for breakfast.
Yeah, and you're hungover, right?
Yeah, in Vegas.
And they go, how do you want it? And Randy goes, blue. And the waitress just looks at him. First, she probably can't understand what he's saying. And then she goes, blue. And he's like, yeah, blue. And she's like, what does that mean? He's like, just barely dead. Like, it just got beaten blue, and I can eat it. And we all are just busting up laughing. And that is, and we could share some more. They just had those sayings like that, right? Just the things that would come out of their mouths and the way they explained things. And to them, it was no different. That was their life. But to us here in America, it was just cracking up laughing.
That's the best. But he's always so matter of fact, even if he's been a bit sarcastic. And like between him and Sam, yeah, my Big Bear like week of training there, then Sam's like, oh, it's going off like a frog in a sock. And I was like, what do you mean a frog in a sock? May, have you ever seen a frog in a sock? And I'm like, yeah, I guess that it would probably go pretty wild. Yeah, that's cool. So it is like a laugh a minute, like the positivity and authenticness that came out of those two. Like, yeah, I don't know if it's good or bad, but they kind of raised my mountain bike career. Like they were my mountain bike mentors, for lack of a better term.
See, that's what's been so cool, because I've heard you saying references to them a lot. I think that's one of the main reasons I reached out, right? And the other cool thing I just want to tell is that was 25 years ago. That's what brought this up to me.
Shit, that's
25
crazy.
years ago, this summer was a year that all this happened. And literally, like right now as we speak, like July, August is when stuff got big. So another cool thing, after that race in Big Bear, so John Tomac had his own bikes and his own team. And I think Johnny T got hurt. Like Rich Houseman was racing for him. And Tomac was looking for another rider. So Tomac calls us, and I say us because my dad's super involved, but I'm there with him, and I'm helping him run the team. And Tomac calls us. He's like, hey, we want to hire Rennie. And we're like, okay, but, we kind of have him. I get we're on a shoestring budget, but we're trying to do the best we can. And we're like, and by the way, there's actually this other guy, Chris Kvarik, that they tell us is even faster. Tomac's kind of like, who are you talking about? I just love that John Tomac would call us on our little race team and try to hire one of our riders after one race. I always just thought that was pretty cool.
That is cool, man. And I don't know if we still got the picture. So Tomac was at the World Cup in Stellenbosch in 98, which I guess spurred myself and my brother on to make a career of it.
Nice.
And well, the other story is I got Palmer's jersey there. So meeting Palmer, he left in just his Dainese kit because he gave me the jersey. And then he was so awesome to my friend. He kind of saw my friend like, oh, he didn't get anything. So he took his pants off and left just like, yeah. So it's like those small things that these guys did. But the reason I bring it up is Tomac was still like the god back then. Like, he was at the tail end of the career, but he was on this like he had his own bikes. That was unheard of. And he was riding the dual track after the downhill just for fun. And my brother and I were obviously on the track riding a bit. And we got a picture of Tomac, John Tomac, and my brother's John T. So Johnny T and John T, like on the last jump. I must dig it up somewhere. But yeah, that's so cool. Like, what an honor that John Tomac calls you and your dad.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, you got the hot talent. Let's have him. You're like, no.
Yeah. And I don't think he was willing to pay Rennie any money. It was just gonna be the same thing, just bikes and travel and stuff like that. Because Johnny T was starting his own company too. Back to your salary thing, I think Johnny T was the first $1 million mountain biker. I think he was the one that had that first $1 million contract. His giant contract, like 94, 95, 96, 97, was like spread out over $1 million from what I can remember. But
yeah, and then I had rumors like he had this the Bell contract was really big as well. Like he was big time, huh?
Yeah.
It'd be cool to get him on the pod. Actually, I was thinking of that, like the stories he must have, but he kind of just floats under the radar, right?
Oh, he does. Even with Eli, you go to the races, but Johnny was like that before. Like, if you look at today and social media and vlogs and podcasts, I mean, Eli's the same way, right? Eli don't hardly do anything. Johnny, he gets that from his dad. Johnny T was like that. He wasn't. He was bigger than life, but he was super humble, super personal, private, and all that. He wasn't out. He wasn't Palmer, and really no one was Palmer. But he just kept to himself and was very quiet like that. So, yeah, I mean, he'd have a million stories. And the cool thing too back then, it's probably a little bit like this, but all those guys were buddies. Like I can remember we'd go to like a Supercross and all like Lopes and King and Tomac and Coley and Palmer would all just be there hanging out. As much as Palmer was a bit of a shit talker, pardon my French, but they all were buddies. Warner and Petey and all that. They all were like best friends, even though they, wanted to kill each other every week on the racetracks.
Yeah, that's like the unique thing versus motocross is because like your riding does the talking. Like you can shit talk and then it's like, well, dude, you're not going to influence me if I'm mentally strong. Like Palmer had a way of influence the guys I could see, but at the same time, you couldn't be that bummed. Like you could make a rivalry in your head, but it's not like he T-boned you in the first turn or took you out, like the motocrossers. So like you would get some proper hatred for a guy if he hurt you or really he caused you to lose the championship. Like in downhill, it's all on your own, right? Like it's up to you and that's it. No one influences it.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. It was just interesting how all that worked out and kind of looking at how it is now with, Brian Deegan's kid and the stuff he says and versus Palmer. You can look at them so similar, like that confidence and cockiness, and the way they would say things. But yeah, it was different. I mean, you're racing the clock versus going into the first corner with 40 guys at Unadilla, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just everyone's different. Like the cockiness can help you, but you've got to back it up, right? And I think it puts like extra pressure on you if you're going to say it out loud. Like you saw maybe the Olympics, like this Noah Lyles guy, like part of you respects him for being so cocky. And then part of you respects the humble guy that kicked his ass. So it's like whatever's your fuel to get you through,
Totally. And I think that was the thing with our guys, with the Aussies. They were quiet confidence. They were almost maybe even a little, I mean, I talked to Chris every so often, not a lot. Talked to Rennie a bit, talked to Waddell and Rando more. But I think they were quiet confidence, but also naively confident. They were like, I just love riding my bike. I just want to ride my bike and we're going to go to the best tracks and I like going fast. Who doesn't like going fast? Who doesn't like winning? So almost like they didn't know any better.
No, there was a bit of ignorance was bliss, I think. There was. I hung around the guys enough and they just loved riding their bikes. Like there were guys training for sure. Lopes, King, Carter, like those guys were training. But I thought these guys were so bike fit, right? Like it made up, like they weren't specific training programs per se, but they'd out-pedal the shit out of, like Rennie did some crazy numbers. Like he's obviously genetically was strong, but the amount they just rode their bikes, like what, from sunrise to sunset, you were around them. What did you guys do between the races?
We were at 7,000 feet in Big Bear too. Remember that. So we're at 7,000 feet. Most people are down to sea level, some in Colorado maybe, but yeah, they just rode all day long. Big Bear, there's dirt everywhere. You can just go ride, and they would find the littlest little bank, right? Just a little dirt bank up against a tree. And I remember Rennie the most just because he's maybe the biggest and the most boisterous, whatever. And just, what was it, like a skid or a carve against this
They
dirt
called
bank.
them cuddies.
Cuddies,
Yeah,
exactly.
cuddies, huh?
Against the tree for like hours.
I know, right?
This one exact thing. So then you think about that. There's some business philosophy. It takes 10,000 repetitions to become an expert of something. So when they're riding down a downhill trail and it comes to a corner that they need to be able to just flick it that hard, they've done that 10,000 times. They could do it in their sleep. So it's just nothing to them. And they would just ride all over Big Bear. They'd go up to Snow Summit and do a lot of downhill runs, but just on their bikes all over town all day. And think about it. They didn't have phones. You didn't have social media. You didn't have YouTube. They didn't have TVs. Rennie and Kavark, there's a story I want to tell you. They lived in like our guest bedroom in our crank office that we kind of separated into guest quarters for them. They had a bathroom and a bedroom. They had no TV in the room. They had no technology. They would use our office phones to call back home to Australia. They had nothing to do but ride bikes in Big Bear at 7,000 feet. And like you said, sun up till sundown. We had dirt jumps all over town. They would just jump and jump and jump. But they loved it. You know, you never, ever once heard them saying like, not happy. You know, I mean, I'm sure there were moments. I know Kavar got a little homesick, but they just loved riding the bikes.
Yeah, I mean, that literally is such a lesson to the new generation. Like, the reason they were so good is they put the work in without even knowing it. They were passionate. They never allowed themselves to get bored or distracted. There were no distractions. So you could get bored, or you go ride your bike around town, or go for an XC rip, or we found some of those dirt jumps, and it was the same. We were up there, and it was outside of dual bikes or four cross bikes, seat up. We'd do an XC rip. And then we'd have lunch. We're like, okay, well, we're bored now, so we go dirt jumping. And then the next day it was downhill laps. So, yeah, I've thought a lot about the cuddies and the repetitions, and it's the 10,000 hour rule, so you become an expert, as well as your touch and feel. So if you can get really good at a cuddy or turn, your subconscious balance is just so impressive.
Yeah. And a lot of times they were doing it out there on their Lobos. They were doing it. They were going all over town on these big old clunky, not great downhill bikes, looking back on it, right? All over Big Bear. And like, you'd have to pedal up some hills, and they're just, I mean, what were those bikes? 40 plus pounds probably. And just wild. So.
Yeah. And those bikes were good when they came out, but the minute they released that iDrive, that was a game changer. When you said, the discrepancy between a factory bike and something you can buy, that's not even an extreme example, you know, but that iDrive was ahead of its time. It really was. So these guys are lining up on way inferior product now, in hindsight, looking back, against PD and Carter that were on the GT team at the time. Yeah, I think I've got the years somewhat correct.
Carter joined in 99. I remember because he was wearing crank gloves in 99. Yeah. So you're totally right. So now we had a couple weeks off, and then the World Cup came to Big Bear that same year. So we had a Norma in Big Bear in May. Then we had a World Cup in Big Bear in June. So again, we're right in our backyard. Now we have all the international guys, Mikel Pascal, Cedric, all the Frenchies, of course, coming, and Nico. And the guys are doing good. They're riding. And Rennie, Kavar, I don't know why Kavar, again, didn't have a great race in Big Bear, but Rennie qualified good again. And if anyone remembers the bottom downhill section, this is one of the most cool moments, but not cool moments. Rennie comes out of the bottom trees at Big Bear. You could see his split times, and he was on a time to put him into the hot seat, go onto the podium, and he qualified really good. So I think he would have been a lock for a podium result, if I remember right. And they had those big doubles at the bottom. Rennie's 200 pounds. We were running Shimano XT cranks, which back then were just like a XC crank and bottom bracket. He does one of the jumps, snaps the bottom bracket, goes off the double, 1 foot in the air, hanging on for dear life, finishes the race run, but he can't pedal. But like, I've talked to many people, and that moment's just incredibly memorable. I don't know if you know Grizz, who's a US mountain bike guy, and he's doing some commentating stuff. He told me not long ago.
I hung out with him so much. Yeah, Grizz McClendon.
Yeah, and he's getting back. He's doing a bunch of commentating stuff, and him and I have talked about some podcast stuff, and he's like, Mark, I was a teenager in Big Bear, and when I saw Rennie do that and what the Aussies were doing, he's like, I wanted to be a downhill mountain biker after seeing that. And that's pretty cool. So again, we come out of Snow Summit, the World Cup, we come out of Big Bear. Rennie did that. Kvarik's still kind of lying low, but the floodgates are getting ready to open after that. So it was cool. I mean, it was really cool. Even though he didn't have the result and he was bummed, we got him, Profile BMX cranks.
Yeah, the company.
Profile BMX cranks in bottom bracket after that. They were all steel that we didn't think he could break. But
dude, you rip your ankle off on. Yeah, I was gonna say, please. Isn't it super sharp by the ankle area? It was not designed.
He had to get some stuff on his ankle because his ankles were always scabbed because they'd put their ankles in. They were running flats, right? And so they'd put their ankles in, and he got that. So yeah, well said before I could even say it.
And the other thing is, so other than Pascal, which some people might know, they should look into. That guy could ride the shit out of a bike. They were of the first guys like really ripping flats, right? Like this Aussie flats domination. Like,
well, Palmer had. Remember Palmer did.
Palmer, yeah, of course. Sorry, Palmer. Yeah, so Palmer, Pascal, and really the Aussies. I don't remember other guys at the top of the sport.
Top guys.
Yeah, let us know in the comments if I've missed someone. But yeah, that's also cool. Like the unique raw, like they were just so raw, hey? Like manhandling their way down the course.
Well, let's talk about Squaw Valley, right? So now we go to Squaw Valley up in Lake Tahoe, 8 hours north of Southern California. First time they'd ever had a big race there. First time they had a World Cup there. And the track was so steep, and your words, raw, steep, loose, nasty. And I think the flat pedals helped those guys because they could just dab wherever they needed, not think about it. And I know guys that clip in can do pretty similar stuff too. But that track was just, most guys were lucky to make it down in a run, which I'm not the biggest fan of having a downhill course where it's survival is the name of the game. But a lot of that was. And that flat pedal and that rawness and looseness had to help the guys there.
Yeah, I think that Squaw Valley's in one of those old famous movies, right?
Transcontinental, I think.
Yeah, I think. Maybe. I don't know if it's that year that Kvarik did well, but it's in Transcontinental. That's I can see the section now and PD ripping through there. It was so steep and dry and raw. And this is where Kvarik just kind of cemented his name in the sport, right? And just shocked everyone, for lack of a better term.
You said it spot on. I mean, it's a clear memory. And again, for people that don't know, no one knows this probably. And Chris, I hope you don't mind me saying this. Chris and I were just messaging the other day. Chris Kvarik had $200 in his bank account going to Squaw. $200. He didn't know, just for the little expenses and stuff. We were doing travel, lodging, and all that stuff. But he only had $200. And he was stressed. He didn't talk a lot, but he was stressed. And if I remember right, I think he got $7,500 back then. A win for a World Cup. People who might know in the comments, or you might know, in the late 90s was $15,000 for win and $7,500 for second. And
what, at a World Cup?
At a World Cup, I think. I could be wrong, but
that's way less now. So that's shocking that it's gone less. I wouldn't put it past them.
I mean, yeah, the sport's done a lot of different turns, right? And go to an MXGP race and they don't have any prize money, So
fair enough.
So back to the Squaw Valley race, yeah. So Kvarik didn't qualify great. He qualified okay. Track was gnarly. Kvarik comes down and he's in the lead. And he's in the lead by a lot. And Nico qualified fast as Vulio, and he beat Nico's time. And everyone is just freaking out. Who is this guy? I mean, they did it with Rennie and Big Bear, right? At Snow Summit at the Norma, and then at the World Cup where he snapped his crank. He comes down. He's in the lead. His time's faster. And I'll never forget, I like just mentioning some of these people because they were so involved, but Rob Eva from Australia, who raced way back in the day for GT, worked for SRAM forever. He's probably still around. And he knew Chris really well because he was the SRAM guy in Australia and he was the GT guy in Australia and he was at the race. And I was with Kvarik kind of standing next to the hot seat. And Rob Eva just came and walked by and looked at me and smiled and went, like, no words needed to be said. Like, he knew, right? Rennie had told us the year before. Waddell had told us the year before, like, guys, he's that. I just got chills. I just totally got chills. That they did it.
That's a proud moment, huh? That must be a proud moment for you and your dad, huh? That's cool. You were part of the company there.
Yeah. It was cool. And we're just sitting there in the hot seat. And the story goes that Nico didn't believe the time. He's like, no way he did that time. Because you got to remember, the course is getting more and more chewed up. And I've been told by many people that, and you've heard stuff that the Frenchies have done, he was on the Sun Chip A team at the time, kind of the last remnants of the Sun team, that they lined people up on the course who knew the split times of where Nico was at versus where Kavarik was at. And there were some slow sections on the course, and they had people in the trees in the slow section saying up 1 second, up 2 second, down 1 second, down 2 second. So he knew, like a pit board, where he was at with his times coming down the track.
Who Nico did back then, because we've heard that he did that, but the other thing is there's many stories that he could sort of visualize a course and do his optimum run, and he'd tell you, okay, this is the best time on this track. Yeah. So maybe he saw Chris's time and he's like, I did not visualize that time. I don't know where to make that time up, you know?
Yep. Yeah, that's why you're spot on. And that's why I've heard he told people there's no way he did that time, you know? Because like, talk about a self-confidence guy. Nico was that guy. Like, I think Nico's the guy that knew, just like McGrath back in Supercross, he knew that if I'm riding to my potential, no one's going to beat me. And that's how Nico was back in the day.
So how did the final go then? Did he get Kavarik's time, or did Kavarik win, or was Kavarik second?
1.3 or 2.3, small margin, and he had to go above and beyond. And there's some pictures. He's on the podium, and you just see him like shaking Chris's hand, like, well done. And that was an unreal moment. That was just like, wow, just couldn't believe it. I mean, we loved racing. These guys loved racing. They were proud. There were a bunch of other Aussies there who kind of come over for this stretch run, because we had Big Bear, we had Squaw, and we had like 2 or 3 Normas in a row right after that, which we'll get into, Mammoth and Park City, Deer Valley. So there were a bunch of Aussies who'd all kind of come. And them boys, they were proud Aussies at the time. So it was pretty cool, especially because he was so unknown. I love Rennie. He was known at the time kind of by after that. But Sharples, Ronnie, all those guys. And now you got another one who's on the world stage. And I don't know. I mean, he only got second. Well, not only got second, but he got second. I don't know if there's ever been a more impactful second.
Yeah, maybe to launch a career. Yeah, that's really impressive, especially against Nico and him thinking that that time's like impossible.
Yep.
And he would have known.
Palmer had just won Big Bear the week before. Palmer won the World Cup in Big Bear the week before. And Petey, I think, had the leader's jersey. So like Palmer and Petey, 2 biggest names of the sport, were the lead, and Nico, and little old crank racing and Christopher comes in and does that. It was pretty cool, dude. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's so epic, dude. And that was just like, I mean, that would have probably just given all the Aussies at home like some motivation, like, because we're not going to get into it yet, but like the Sam Hills, the Jared Graves, the Bryn Atkinson that came after that, it was
totally.
It's like, shit, this can really be done,
Absolutely, yeah. And that's cool, right? I mean, they always love telling me like, hey, we're a country the same geographical size as America with the 10th of the population, full of a bunch of convicts. That'd be their joke, right? Like, they just don't know any better. And they would say that lightheartedly, but they're incredibly proud. They're proud sportsmen. They're competitive. They're fun. They're just good, genuine people. And it was just cool to be a part of that. No,
totally. I think you've summed it up. But so what else do you think it is that makes an Aussie so fast on a downhill bike? Because there was this period. It's like, dude, someone, like when I got there, it's like, Sean Heimdall sort of became the new crank team. Yep. He was like, dude, there's a fast Aussie. He can stay with me. Like, you just knew the potential. And there were so many others, like Panozzo after that.
Joel came over the next year.
Yeah, Joel, Havakainen. There were just so many. Dude, I'm drawing a blank, but there was a bunch Ben Corey
won the Junior World Championships the next year.
Junior World Champ. There was just this like, they would just come and come and come. So what was it about the Aussies?
I think, we've touched on it. They just love to ride their bikes. There's something to be said for that love and passion. And you hear a lot of the riders say it now. It's like, I just want to have fun. I want to enjoy it. because the pressure could be a lot. I mean, you competed at the highest level. You had World Cup podiums. The pressure could be a lot. I think they were immune to pressure, especially early on. I think someone like Troy nowadays probably feels a bit more of the pressure because he's kind of been around a while. The longer you've been there, I'm a dad
and it's
now.
expected now. Yeah, it's expected for Troy to be on the podium. You're the consistent guy. You should win another race.
That's life in general, right? That's like life in general. It's the older you get, ignorance is bliss. I think you said that, and they just didn't know any better, but they just loved it. Their passion for it was second to none. And I mean, riding a downhill bike's pretty fun. And I think a little bit of it was a way out of Australia. I mean, not that Australia is bad, but here in America, American football and sports is a lot of ways for people out of not the most ideal, great situations to elevate their life, to better their life. Not that their life was bad. I'm not saying that at all, but going to America is pretty cool. I mean, I'm blessed. I tell my kids this all the time. We do this road trip that takes us right next to the border in El Paso, Texas, and Mexico's there and we're here. And I've said, kids, you're blessed that you were born here, and being born in Australia is great too. But the opportunity to come to America, and that's where Kavar, each time I see him or talk to him, he still thanks us, did we do that much? He could have gotten GT bikes if he came to America. He probably could have got some other people to drive him around, but we kind of formulated it. We hopefully gave him a good environment. We let him hang out with Rennie and Waddell all the time, and he got to race bikes, and Rennie the same thing, and Waddell the same thing, and Rando came along after that, so they're just grateful. They're humble people. I think a lot of them are like South Africans. I know a few of you guys. I mean, you guys are incredibly kind, nice, humble people. And there's something to be said for that. I mean, there's also the other side of the Palmers or maybe some of the Frenchies or whatever that have a different kind of confidence or arrogance. But for them, it just worked. They didn't know any different. They loved riding their bikes. They were given a great opportunity, but they had to have the skills to back it up. But they developed those skills. That time on the bike, for anyone listening, time on the bike is more valuable than any other intervals you're doing on the road bike.
Yeah, no, you said it like hit the nail on the head there. And I look at it's not that their life was tough or crazy bad at Australia and it's the only way out. But I guess to make a living in bikes, it wasn't going to happen in Australia. It wasn't going to happen for me in South Africa. So, you take a lot of sacrifice to come over for 6 months, to not have money in your bank account. So I think you maybe appreciate the opportunity and know I've got to prove myself. Otherwise I'm going home and I'm going to just get a normal job. And there's maybe less opportunities, like you said. In America, there's way more opportunities in the industry and that stuff. So that's interesting that you bring that up. And I've thought about that a lot, and it's probably quite similar in the moto industry, Deegan being maybe an outlier now. But the guys it's blue collar workers, they call it, right? They come from blue collar homes that make it in motocross because they've got the grit and the FU attitude. Because if you're handed something too easy, you don't learn the work ethic.
Totally. Yeah. Look at Chad Reed. Him and Ellie went to Europe, and Chad's parents basically told him, because he went there and he went with his girlfriend. They were 18 years old, and Chad went to Europe and lived in Belgium. I like Belgium and all, but living in Belgium for a winter, riding the Sands of Lommel, and he had to do it because he wanted to get to America. So he had to fight and claw through that. Then he gets to America. Then he's got that opportunity, and the rest is history. And now the story with the Lawrence brothers, super similar. The Lawrence brothers and their parents had to go to Europe to develop, live on minimal money, almost next to none at times, to fight and claw. And Hunter Lawrence, and again, I don't want to talk too much about moto. Hunter Lawrence gave a great quote recently. Two things. They asked him about the pressure of this, and he's like, dude, this ain't pressure. He had lived in Belgium. He was old enough to know that, he was the family bread earner. Mom and dad were there with a special needs brother and a little brother. He was the bread earner. He's like, that's pressure. And then he also said, pressure's privilege. Pressure means you got something worthwhile, right? You got an opportunity to do something great. You got good things in front of you. So I think that's really cool. And here in America, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of kids that get things given to them. Deegan can be the anomaly, but I'm stoked to see a lot of the young downhill Americans popping up. I keep close tabs on that. There's a lot of regional series. There's a new US Pro Downhill series here in America. And there's some good, hungry young Americans coming into downhill in America too. And I hope they get that hunger and fight for it, because they're having to go to Europe, right? I mean, not exactly the same, but similar, that these young Americans are now having to go to Europe. How much time Dakota's not young anymore, but how how much time has Dakota spent in Europe, months at a time over there, because he wants it. He's hungry.
Yeah.
He wants it. So he's going after that, as an American. So I don't know Dakota at all, but props to him for doing that. I think it's rad. I love it.
Yeah, there's something to be said, like when there's no plan B, you got to make it happen. Like Chad Reed, like betting on him, he's been big luck. He bets on himself. And I think that's amazing. Like you say, it can be pressure or it can just be fuel, to just get up and grind and ride your bike. And it's the same like the Aussies, or like when I went over and my dad hands me $500. And of course he was there as a backup, like he would pay the race entries, and I had some support from Global and then Sven's team after that. But the reason I bring it up is like, well, when it started like running out of money, I would grout some tiles, like I wasn't going to go hungry. Sven and Uncle were never going to let that happen. But I think there is something to be said, like, shit, I'm over here. These guys are letting me crash in their office. Like they're really sacrificing a lot. Like I better make this count, Yeah.
And you're totally right. And I don't know Sven and Anka well. That's so cool you've done that. And I've just seen them through their photography and all the riding they're doing, but they probably had no problem doing it, right? Like, yes, you could say it's a little bit out of the way, but they loved it. You were a racer, you were a young, hungry guy. Like that was the same with us. Like, I had some moments sometimes where I wanted to kill Johnny Waddell. I had some moments sometimes where I wanted to kill Rennie or kill
Let's hear
Kavar,
them. What were they doing? Let's hear them.
Here's the simple one. Nate Adams, mountain biker from Colorado, a good buddy of mine, he road tripped with us after some of those Norbas to the East Coast World Cups. He's like, yeah, Mark, do you remember when we were driving across? We were in the middle of probably Iowa or Nebraska. We're all sleeping. We wake up and we're on the side of the road out of gas. Johnny was driving and we ran out of gas. I'm like, Johnny, what are you doing? He's like, I don't know. It's like, there's a gas gauge, dude. Like, check the gas gauge. So now we're driving and we got to figure. I think I was the only one that had a cell phone at the time. Here's one for you with Rennie. So we were driving. I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but we were driving to the Norma in Park City. I think Rennie was driving or Waddell was driving. Love those guys, but they were two of the ones who make some of the dumber decisions. I'll be honest with you. Street smarts out the yin yang, real world, or like book smarts and maybe some driving smarts like gas in the gas tank. We're driving to Park City. We're going through some mountain passes. One of them's driving. We have our big van. We have our trailer, and they're like going way too fast. I'm like, hey, just slow down. But they tap the brakes pretty hard. The trailer starts swapping. They hit the brakes harder, and I'm like, no, hit the gas. You got to hit the gas to straighten it out. I'm scared. And then Rennie, I'll never forget, Rennie goes, don't you love the feeling when you know something bad's going to happen? I'm like, no, I don't. 80, 90 miles an hour on the highway, us jackknifed with the future of Australian downhill in the car, maybe dead or broken in half, So those were some of the moments, but those are the things you remember now and you just cherish, right? And I love the guys to death, so.
No, I mean, Rennie's been on the pod. I'll have to send him this one and say, hey, here's some more stories you probably forgot. We need to do round 2. And I need to message Kavarik as well. We were going to do like a podcast with Kavarik and Rennie. Rennie was super keen. But good luck me getting the logistics to line up to get Kavarik in a Canadian time zone, Rennie in an Aussie one, and me in South Africa.
Chris has gone kind of quiet lately too. I try to reach out to Chris. He's not as vocal. Rennie's all over social media nowadays doing his victory laps thing. Which is
it's
coaching and
so
training
cool.
down Australia. Yeah, really cool.
Dude, and like you say, they do some stupid shit, but they are really like, if you hear Rennie talk about riding and cornering and like the racing and the strategy, you're like, what? Like he's so thoughtful that like he was the one that was like, dude, practice is just about getting the preparation and the knowledge for your one race run, from your gears to your braking. And it's like, people don't actually sometimes just break it down and be like, hey, what am I doing in practice? Trying to figure out how fast I can go in that turn, trying to figure out what gear I need to be in there. Like that's what you do in practice. Don't overthink it. Just like, what's the plan to give yourself enough knowledge to do a race run? So yeah, man, there's just millions of those stories with Rennie. And then, bro, I think he told it on the podcast, so I have to tell it to you because you might not have heard it. Did you hear about us going to Supercross? When we were at Bootleg Canyon, they used to do like a preseason race out in Bootleg Canyon by Vegas.
Yeah, and then the Supercross finals were in Vegas. I don't remember.
Yeah, so same thing. We go out there, preseason. Now, I don't have a lot of money, so I went into practice. I was like, I'm not racing. I can't afford the entry fee. Like, it's not worth it for me.
course.
Bryn's maybe going to race. Sam, I don't know if Sam races, but off we go to Supercross the night before. So obviously Rennie has a few beers. And we had a bunch of water bottles in the car on the drive up. And it was total like Aussie, we're not going to stop for a pee. So if you need one, make use of a water bottle. So now we finish the Supercross like 11, 12 at night. We're driving back to the hotel or bootleg from Vegas. And I would just hear Rennie like, oh, I'm thirsty. And he just grabs a water bottle from under the car. Bro, and this is how it went. We all looked, and I can think no one said anything because I think someone realized, and you just saw him take a swig, but he didn't just splash it out like a normal human would. He goes like this, and he looks and he goes, I've just drank piss, haven't I? All nonchalantly like that. And then he puts the cap on. Like he doesn't get fazed. Like he didn't even make a big thing about it. And we were in tears, man. And then he'd go to Fort William in a couple of weeks and him and Sam will be on the podium. Like was that
03 when they were riding for Shaun? When Rennie was on
that 03. Yeah, exactly.
Rennie,
like not on big wage, like literally full circle, like back to crank days. And he's like, okay, well.
Yeti had fallen apart, I think, right? Because Yeti was changing ownership and all that. Yeah, and I remember that.
Exactly.
Rennie, I think, brought Shaun's van.
Dude, he won the World Cup overall that year. On
a bike that he said was sold at Walmart.
Yeah, and like they had to drop the bottom bracket, so they had to like Dremel out under the seat area to drop the shock, to drop the BB. Okay, so they got that, the geometry, him and Sam got it sorted. And him and Sam would go do the World Cups. Bryn and Jared would stay doing more than Orbers. He won the World Cup overall.
He did.
Just so like, I lied
to you.
Chip on his shoulder, like didn't give a shit, you know?
Yeah, I was at that race in Capru at the World Cup finals. I happened to be in Europe going to EICMA or Intermont, one of the big motorcycle trade shows, I think in Italy. And Sharples was kind of running an Australian national team at the time. So like Rennie and Sam would, I think, stay with like Sharples with his national team budget.
Yeah, with the juniors. The juniors he'd take over to Europe for a few races,
Yep. So I always stay in touch with Sharples. And I was like, hey, I'm going to be there. Can I stay with you? He's like, yeah. And I didn't even tell Rennie, and I just showed up. Do people know, and do you know how much Rennie loves milk?
I know he used to try to do the like 2-gallon test.
Well, no, he would drink milk before race runs, at least with us. So I showed up at that World Cup. I'm there like the day of the race, and I show up with like a half like gallon or quart of milk, and he chugs a big old thing of milk and then goes and wins the World Cup that night. So that was the first time I met Sam Hill, was at that race too. So.
Yeah, that was loose Sam Hill days. He tidied it up after that days. I think he went on the podium with Jack and Coke. He went on the podium with like a 2-liter Jack and Coke.
And like winning junior world with times that put him on the podium for seniors, right?
Oh, yeah. What, Sam Hill?
Yeah.
As a junior? No, it was crazy. I think he crashed in Lugano in 03 and won juniors, I think. I want to say, but he was like close to Greg's time, but he literally had it off the bike. No, he was. Shit. Yeah, it was fast. You must ask EC about watching him at that race. He was just like, he thought it was in fast forward. He was just watching Sam, and he's like, it seems like it's in fast forward, and he's like, that's me. I'm not going to do downhill anymore.
Well, that's the legendary line of, is it Petey or someone? It was Sam's run in 08 in Val di Sole, and he goes, it looks like it's sped up.
Yeah, I guess that was like Amory this year at Val di Sole, I guess, huh?
Oh, yeah. And that was cool. You did that post-race podcast with that, I think with Windmasters and a couple other guys, and your guys' analysis is just really cool. So I dig it. So.
Oh, appreciate that, man. Yeah, we're having fun with it. Having fun with it for sure.
So that's cool.
Yeah, so you guys had like fireworks going off in the back of vans, them almost jackknifing trailers, all while beating the world's best on inferior product. And I mean, it's just a great story. It's a feel-good story as well, you know.
And the cool thing too, after that Squaw race, is if you don't remember or not who lives in Lake Tahoe, that's Shaun Palmer. And so after that Squaw race, we get invited to Palmer's house for the after party. And the stories from that after party at Palmer's house in 99, he had like a pit bike track around his whole house. It was kind of like on the side of a hill with cool jumps and berms. And he had Z50s. So before like the CRF and XR50s, he had Z50s, and there's like every World Cup downhill guy, probably minus Nico Villot there, riding these Z50s all around Palmer's house. And Palmer was friends with like McGrath and Emig and Rhino, so he had all of their old motocross helmets. So he was trying to be safe and make everyone wear a helmet, but everyone's wearing like Jeff Emig's old showy VFX Supercross helmet and Ryan Hughes' old helmet. And then by the end of the night, that just turned into a rowdy party with everything in the middle of Palmer's garage, all the Z50s, all of Palmer's Specialized, his road bikes, his cross-country bikes. And I just remember Troy Lee and Scott Sharples in the middle of this whole thing. And they had like bags of flour or something, and they're just spraying bags of flour everywhere with beer and liquids. It was just out of control. So probably one of the most legendary parties I'd ever seen, which was right after that Squaw World Cup, which was pretty cool.
Is that when it was? Because I've heard about this party, right? And I've seen some of the pictures, and everyone's still, I mean, you're speaking about it 25 years later. And that's how crazy it was. And that was Palmer's side of the sport, the rock star. I mean, he had a chrome bus at the time. Like, it was really cool. I mean, that's, like I said, that we all looked up to him, and me as a kid, and, you know, asking for his jersey here at home. And it's just those little things that just, I guess, they are your inspiration to go and make it a career. It's seeing these guys larger than life.
Totally. And he was cool personally too, you know, like we got to know him a little bit just because now we're like racing and we're kind of in there. And he invited us to his house for that party after that. And that was kind of his swan song too. Now, because 99, he didn't race anymore after 99. So that was really the only big race that was in his backyard in Squaw Valley. He didn't live far away. So looking back on it now, I think that big party was kind of like, hey, he didn't know if he was going to race anymore because he didn't want to race for cheap. And salaries at that time were actually starting to dwindle just a little bit. If you want to talk about industry stuff in the late 90s.
Yeah, sure.
Those big mid-90s salaries of the Tomacs and the Missy Giovis were they were going away. Like Missy rode for real cheap the next year, I think, on Foes. And Palmer like didn't get offered a deal of much, if anything, from Specialized because I think they lost some Mountain Dew money. And Palmer was done after 99, you know? So if you think about it, there was only 4 years of Shaun Palmer in the sport, 1 year on Intense, 3 years on Specialized, and then he was done. So that party at his house after the Squaw Valley World Cup in 99, looking back on it, almost kind of fitting, right? Go out with the bang if you would.
Yeah, and he won that Big Bear National that year, and he went on the podium.
The World Cup.
Podium with, the World Cup, the podium with the gold suit. And like he burst onto the scene, I feel like it was 96 when he got second in Cairns. Like that's kind of a Kovarik to Nico thing as well. It's like, who is this guy? Flat pedals, moto gear. And then you've got Kovarik, like the Aussie version. Like, who is this kid? Flat pedals. Just like, dude, I'll never forget. Like, I got to know Palmer a little bit after that when he sort of came back and he was going to race a little bit and he was helping the Intense team a bit. And he was really nice to me. Like, I think maybe because I knew PD a bit. So there was that. And he hadn't done a lot of riding or training. And we were talking at the national race in Matt Thompson and those guys put it in, is it Sol Vista? I forget. Anyway.
That private place. Yep.
Dude, I'll never forget. He's sitting there with John Dawson at SRAM. And I'm like, and Palmer, you got the legs? You know, there's a bit of a pedaling section here at altitude, like just banter. And he's like, dude, doesn't matter. I'm older. I haven't trained. I want it more than these kids. And that was, you know, his attitude, that sort of self-outwardly confidence and backing himself. And inside his Fox jerseys, I don't know if you know this. Inside the Fox jersey, if you flip the collar, apparently had a few different versions. And mine, I think, said, I am the best. So the inside of the collar, he had Fox put that on there. And that was kind of probably his mantra and his self-talk, you know, his positive self-talk. So
isn't that cool? He did it where no one could see it. I like
exactly.
That.
Yeah, exactly. It's for
patches,
him,
right? Yeah. People like butt patches.
And he put it on the inside of the collar. I've framed it now, but it's there. Yeah, and I asked him about it. He had a few different ones that maybe not many people knew about, but he did.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah,
that's
super
really
cool.
That's really
but
cool.
yeah, what a bummer. Like, we didn't get to see Palmer for longer. Like, if if he'd got contracts, like I might have overlapped with him in 03.
Totally.
Like if he went out in
he only
99
raced for 4 years, right?
Yeah, and he was
only raced
just
for
like
4 years. Yeah.
He just met his stride. How's that for a mic drop? Like, dude, you're not going to pay me what I'm worth, and he is worth that and more. Yes, we're still talking about him. He's like my dream podcast guest, right? And just to hang out with. And he only raced for 4 years. Fucking
4
nuts.
years.
Yeah, it is crazy. Versus, a lot of the industry go for a lot longer.
Yeah. Guys seem like they're going a little bit longer nowadays too, right? It seems, I think just with health in general, knowledge of your health of your body, your mental health, your physical health, your spiritual health, all that stuff. Guys are going well into their 30s. And I know Palmer started, I think he was like 28, 29 just when he started anyways. But like, I know PD rode for a long time too, but you're just seeing more and more guys in a lot of sports, whether it's stick and ball here in America or, soccer, football, international football, or motocross. Guys are just racing a lot longer. So I think that's great because I think that keeps the names out there, right? The people I love the young talent. I love seeing young riders coming up. I really do. But you need those big names to draw, to catch headlines for people to be like, okay, cool. I know downhill mountain biking because Luke Bruni is still racing, whereas
totally.
Probably 30 now, isn't he? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, exactly. And he's spoken on and off like he's not going to do it for as long as Greg. But you never know. Like if you're still performing and you can manage the pressure, manage your mental health, physically, innovations are coming through that you can stay healthy.
Yeah.
And then if you like Greg and you can have a fun off season but still manage your training and stuff, like you need to switch off. And that's what I think is the downfall of myself. That was a lot of the reason I did walk away, is the industry as well as I was burnt out. And that's Rennie, that's Kavarik. I think that's why they had maybe more celebrations before, after races near the tail end, because it's like, it's so all consuming being away from home and being homesick and feeling like you're missing out on real life. And that's maybe why they let the distractions get to them. Whereas Europeans, they go home for 2-3 weeks. Maybe they see their friends away from the sport. They like reset. They see that there's something about going home. It resets you.
Totally. How awesome. I knew a little bit about it, but Brendan, in that podcast about Sam, that you asked what made Sam go so fast. And it's totally true. I was having conversations with Sam at that time. He was over being on the road. He wanted to be home, and, he's kind of a quiet homebody guy anyways, but I never put that together, that the reason he went so fast was he was kind of degaff, as they say, don't give a F, that, hey, I'm going to go fast, and if I do win, that's great. If I crash and get injured and go home, then whatever, But yeah, Sam, I remember Sam was super homesick on that stuff too, so it's a lot. It's a lot. Do you know what's funny? You just pointed out Greg. Greg was racing at these World Cups in 99.
Oh, yeah. He 2000 in Vale, he got third and crashed into the finish barriers and broke his finger or hand afterwards.
25 years ago.
Dude, I chatted to him today. I keep saying, like, so should I come to Worlds? Is it your last one? So if you're not there next year, and then he like doesn't say that he's not going to not be there. And I'm like, really? What are we talking about here? You're retiring, right? Like, but hey, man, if you can, dude, if you've still got the motivation and you're dealing with the pressure well, like they say, there's not many NFL players that walk away. They get forced out or no contract because, dude, it's infectious. It's got to fuel. It fuels the ego, dude. Everyone's shouting your name and kissing your ass, and like Palmer said, like there's no better feeling in the world than standing on top of a podium, seeing that you beat everyone.
Yeah, it's like a rock star being on stage, right? They say it's addicting, and they've tried every whatever in the world, same as being on a podium. Like, yeah, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
No, it is cool. And it's racing's easy. Like for those Aussies, once it started ticking, like, you might crash and then get a flat tire the next race. But if your speed's there, you're like, dude, it's all good. Let's get to the next race. I'm probably going to be on the podium again. Like prize money, celebrations.
Well,
no real groupies in mountain biking, but the other stuff's rock star life.
The Aussies just had a bunch of buddies that like to tear up condos, and we don't need to get into that too much, but a couple of them had messaged me lately. But one of the podiums I want to talk about is, so the next week after that race in Squaw, we go to Mammoth for the Norman National in Mammoth. which we were away from the kamikaze downhill by that time. They'd start to build more of a normal, traditional, in the trees downhill, if you would. And Kvark won, dominated the Norba, and Rennie got third. So at that Norba, Kvark won, Rennie got third. And on the podium was Steve Pete, Miles Rockwell, and Jürgen Benecke.
So this is 99 still, right?
99. The week after Squaw. We may have taken one weekend off for Independence Day, July 4th here in America. And we go to that Norba, and Kvark is just like, yeah, I got this. Qualifies fast. I think it might have been fastest, but right at the front. Dominates, wins. Rennie gets third. The podium is just stacked. Those guys, Petey was making a couple $100,000. Miles was making a couple $100,000 from Giant. Jürgen, I'm sure, was making 100, 200,000. In the field was Palmer, Carter, Lopes, King, Cully, Sharples, Ronning, Voorhees, I think like Oscar Saez, David Vasquez. Like, I want to pull up those results. And Kvark dominated and won. Rennie gets third. We have a big party after that, which we got in a little bit of trouble with our condo in Mammoth. Cops got called, but it was a pretty good time. Sean McCarroll was there too. I'd like to call Sean out on that because we got a big bill on fixing that condo, and most of the Aussies split up the bill. Sean McCarroll never paid his part. So if Sean's listening, I'll just drop that one out there.
Yeah, but I heard the other Aussies would say that's not a surprise, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Drop it. But then
dude, that's sick. So they're going up against these guys on multiple six-figure deals and just schooling them. That's cool, huh?
Yeah, it was really cool. And I'll never forget, too, Kvark after qualifying, Mammoth obviously doesn't, it's just dust. But, Kvark didn't even want his bike touched. He didn't even want to, dust it off. Don't touch anything on my bike. Leave the dust on it. Leave it exactly as it is before his race run. Because we would qualify in the morning. So we do, seeding run, qualifying in the morning, and then the finals in the afternoon. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I heard Sharples as well. When the forks were those open bath forks, Sharples also was after quali, do not spray my bike, do not clean anything. The small bump feels the way it does now, and I want it to feel the same. Because you could change the characteristics of the stanchions a little bit.
Totally.
It was interesting back then. Now, it's all internal. There's closed dampers, so it doesn't a good wash. But yeah, that's interesting. Just leave my bike the way it is, even if it's creaking. I want to ride it the way I know it. Yeah,
exactly. They know it, right? I've heard that same thing with supercross racers. They have a practice bike at home, and then they get to the race on the weekend, and the race bike's a little bit different than the practice bike, and it can be a little bit weird. Something cool I never thought about until just now was Sharples won Mammoth the year before. So Sharples won Mammoth in 98, Kvark won in 99 on basically the same exact course. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's sick. So where'd you guys go after that? I mean, that obviously mood would have been really good.
It was. So we went to Deer Valley, Park City, Utah. So Deer Valley Ski Resort in Park City, which had been at Norma for a while. Track there was super technical too and dusty and loose. So right up Kvark's alley. Kvark crashed in his finals race run and still won that Norma. So by then, it's just floodgates are open and this guy is the guy.
Yeah. So did he get picked up the next year or what? I forget who he rode for in 2000.
Jeff started talking to him at Intense, yeah. So we were trying to salvage the team, but our family clothing business, Crank, was struggling a bit. And we're like, do we want to try and run a race team and just do that? But Yeti was going after Rennie. Intense was going after Kvark, which actually was really cool because Chris still rides Intense bikes, 24 years later, which is awesome. And I actually still talk to Jeff and Jen at Intense every so often too. So yeah, they came after him. But again, that's what you talked earlier though about those guys and the salaries they were taking. I mean, I could be wrong, and I maybe shouldn't say this, but I think Rennie got $30,000 the next year, and Kvark got $60,000. And I heard other riders were not happy. I mean, Chris was the hottest commodity in the sport now, and I'm pretty sure he didn't make $100,000 that next year. And then, he was out winning Normas and getting on podiums at World Cups and, doing really good. And I heard some of the other riders weren't stoked at the salary he took.
Yeah, I think it was unfortunately the ignorant part. I don't think they intentionally did that. I think they didn't know, to speak to PD or someone would be like, whoa. I know Palmer would tell PD, and then maybe PD would tell Manar, and we,
Totally.
you're not meant to talk about it. Some weird UCI
He does.
bullshit contract rule. I'm like, that's ridiculous. But
Yeah.
if you don't know what to ask for. And if the teams are going to offer you that and you take it, like, is it the team's fault? Like, oh, we could offer you 60, but here's 150 because, I don't know, we can. Like, obviously you're going to lowball them. But, I think that is unfortunate because they definitely deserve more. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, deserve and your worth is what someone will pay you or what you'll agree to take, right? Like, I like to earn a living. I know how to negotiate my salaries. I know what my worth is. A little bit of the ignorance. I mean, that's where agents, as much as agents can get a bad rap, that's where agents can show their worth. They know what the rider is worth. So, but I think for Chris, it was a win-win, right? Let's be honest. That Intense bike was the best downhill bike at the time. He got on those Manitou forks. They came out with that Dorado fork that next year. That Dorado fork, that Manitou upside down fork, was unreal. And look at what Chris Webb did the next 3 years, going to Fort Bill in 2002, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, he has the record margin. I think that still stands on that Fort Bill course that was just obviously in tatters at the time. So, yeah, I mean, there's obviously the industry going into a slump as well. Like, you can say you're worth 200 grand, but if there's no offers out there, you take less. Like, I would say Danny Hart got into a cycle now and probably deserves more and can get the results still. But unfortunately, the way the contract cycles work and who's looking and who's available, there's supply and demand that happens as well. And the Aussies also, you could look at them as a risk. You're like, okay, they came out hot shit, but if you heard that off the course, they're a little bit more fun and cause a little bit of havoc, so you're taking a risk there. So you got to maybe like see if you can tone them down there a bit, Yeah,
for sure. I mean, it's the decisions that teams have to make, and but it was a good time, and I know those guys were happy, and we were happy to help them. We had the rest of that summer. We went back east. We went to Mount St. Anne. We went to Bromont. So Mount St. Anne, they used to have Mount St. Anne and Bromont like right after each other, both World Cups, which is crazy because they're like 3 hours apart, and in the same province of Canada, and they'd have World Cups like back-to-back weeks, which doesn't make total business sense. And then in between Bromont and Mount St. Anne, we went down to New York City. Here's a story that's hilarious. So we leave Quebec, and we're going down to New York City. We have Jared Rando with us, and I think we had Nate Adams with us too. And we have a week off, so we're going to go down to Lars Tribute's house. If anyone knows Lars, old school downhill guy in America, lives down in New Jersey. He's like, yeah, come stay with us. So we're driving down, I don't know, I-85, I-95, out of Quebec, down into New York. We get to the border. We're driving. We're just, young American and Aussies. No hassles, right? This is pre-9/11, so nothing. But we get to the border. They're like, hey, can we see your passports? And they're just glancing at everyone's passports. Well, good old Reddy is in the back seat. He doesn't have his passport ready. He's fumbling through all of his stuff, trying to find his passport. So what does that do? Raise a red flag, right? So everyone else has gone through the border. They've stamped all of our passports. Randy gets his passport. Well, he's been in America too long. He's passed his, what do they call it, a tourist passport. So he's been here too long. They're like, you can't come back in America. We're like, what are you talking about? They're like, you've been here too long. You have to go back to the Aussie embassy in Montreal and get your passport redone so that you can come back in. We're like, no. This guy has a flight tomorrow. All of us have already come into America. They're like, no, you got to go back to Montreal to get your passport figured out. We're like, no way. So Rando's trying to figure out how to change his flight for the next day. We turn around. We go back into Canada. And sorry, Kvark, but I'll tell this story. We go into Canada, and they decided to ask us, have any of you ever been convicted of a crime? Well, dumbass Kvark says yes.
Oh, no. Oh, this one.
You can't go into Canada if you've been convicted of a crime. So they won't let Kvark come into Canada. They won't let Reddy come into America. I have one Aussie stuck in America, one Aussie stuck in Canada. I'm 19 years old. Kvark's 21. Rennie had just turned 18. Waddell's 18. Rando's 18, 17, 18. Like, oh my gosh, dude. We finally just begged him. We said, you guys, we're just mountain bike racers. We're just trying to go. He's got a flight. Look at, here's his ticket. He's got a flight to Australia. Like, all right, guys, just get it handled. Just go. Just get it handled. we basically just begged them long enough that they let us go to New York. But that's a story that's just like, come on, guys. That was one of the times where, I was not stoked on Rennie and Guar.
Dude, I'm not surprised. That's hilarious. You got one that's not allowed into America, so you turn around one that's not allowed to leave the border. Dude, that's so funny. I should have just left both of them all. Exactly. Figure it out. You guys are now adults. But visas are a pain in my ass, man. Visas, and that's another thing people don't understand. It's so difficult.
They were just doing it on just tourist passports, They weren't doing the full visas. I don't know. I haven't been involved in international racing in a while. I don't know if it's different now, but the Aussies could just come to America, I think, for like 6 months.
I think it's 90 days. Maybe, 90 days or maybe 6 months,
May,
or
June,
90 days.
Yeah, it might have been 90 days because we were in August, right? So they came over May, June, July. Yeah, so it might have been we were past 90 days. So, I mean, I should have been a better team manager and realized that too, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you hadn't dealt with Aussies for long enough to know that that's an issue, yeah.
Totally.
And that's the other risk, yeah.
We went to New York City that next week, and we stayed with Lars down in New York City. And I actually was just in New York City for some work I'm doing now and was riding a bike through Manhattan. But me, all those guys, Rando was gone, but Rennie, Waddell, and Kavarik and Lars took our mountain bikes from Jersey, took the subway underneath the Hudson River. We got off the subway underneath the Twin Towers before the Twin Towers had collapsed. I can remember coming out, looking back up, going, wow, that's cool. We rode, I think we had our slalom bikes, which were like hardtail GTs. We rode them all up and down Manhattan, all the way up to Central Park, back through Times Square. Those memories were just absolutely unreal to just ride back. And now looking back on it, like, those guys are my buddies, but like to ride mountain bikes through Times Square with the level of those riders, pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think I've got pictures with Brendog and some Aussies as well with Sven, like also in between a race. And luckily Sven and Anke were adventurous. So it's like, well, let's go past New York City and we take the bikes off and you go get the pizza and you ride through the city. It's pretty cool. And those are the memories. Like, we can remember the results and they were incredible, but it's those sort of memories you make in between that make traveling the world like what it is. You make these sort of lifelong friends. And that's why the podcast has been cool. It's like, why did you start it? What's the motivation? And to tell the stories is one thing, but I got to catch up with Rennie for 3 hours. That's not going to happen every day. Like, you wouldn't really do that, right? And myself and you might not talk for this long. Hopefully we touch base at some point again, like in person. But that's the other sort of selfish reason, is to reconnect and sort of pull out some of these stories, because I think it can add humor, it can add value, and maybe inspire people to go out there and live their dream, whatever it may be, And
a bike's a great way to live it. I mean, look how blessed we are, right? Like, my mom and dad met at the motorcycle track when they were 16 years old. So I've been on two wheels since before I was born, and I still work in the two wheel space. Two wheels are a great way to do it. So I'm sure every person listening to this knows that, but might as well preach to the choir.
No, why not? Why not? So you guys had some tough times at the end of that year, like with the company, and where were you manufacturing, and like what are the challenges? Like you said, sometimes there was delay on production, so that obviously burns cash flow. You've got big companies that are coming from moto, with that budget coming into the sport.
Yeah, it was challenging. It was super challenging. I mean, my dad, to his credit, he knew the space. He knew it really, really well, having worked at like O'Neill Clothing and Oakley, and even worked at Answer Clothing back in the day. So he knew all about it, but it takes capital to do it, right? It's just like any business. I've had failed businesses because I didn't have the capital to do them either. And we partnered with OGK on the helmets, and I thought the helmets at their time were very ahead of their time. We were working on a new downhill helmet that we showed at Interbike in 98 or 99, which I think Greg wore that helmet once they finally put that downhill helmet into production, which of course was going after Troy Lee, because Troy had his Daytona and then his D2, which were just phenomenal helmets. We had a lot of really cool stuff. Like we said, we had Mike Metzger early on. Some things I want to give us credit for is we really designed the gear for the body. Gear was coming from moto, right? Palmer was just wearing Fox motocross gear, which is meant for you to sit on a dirt bike and you go up and down a little bit, but you're not pedaling, you're not throwing the bike side to side sprinting. So we had a really good designer named Gota Mitra, who took gloves and he put spandex inside of gloves, and he curved the glove. So the glove was already curved, and he put spandex on the side of it so that it stretched to your hand as your hand moved. Whereas all the former gloves, if you looked at the former gloves, they all were just heavy motocross gloves with like big padding on them and kind of jalopy and stuff. We took the pants and we put panels in the pants sideways and this way. We put stretch materials in them. So we did a lot of great stuff. But yeah, it was just funding. The industry was kind of going downhill a little bit at the time, which sounds funny just to say that, but the industry wasn't going so great. And my dad just made a business decision at the end of 99, going into 2000. We kept the race team going for one more year. We hired Rando and Intense gave us bikes. I think Stever felt bad because he hired Kvark away from us, but he gave us bikes, and Jeff was really cool. He gave us a bunch of extra frames so we could sell them for some extra money, which was great, which I still love.
He is that type of guy. Eh? He is that type of passionate, really good-hearted guy.
Yeah, he would. We'd go down there to pick up some bikes. He's like, hey, like grab like 4 extra frames. Just take some M1s and some slalom frames and get some money from whatever you do. Just go pay for racing. He was awesome.
And then the accountant's like, what are you doing? And he's like, you know, he's just so passionate. I just, all my dealings with him, like I saw that would be how he would deal with it.
I don't think the CFO is our biggest fan.
No, definitely not. So what
that was cool. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, you said the downfall or the industry was going a bit downhill. What was it? Well, like looking back now, what were the like contributing factors?
Well, I think it's a couple things. I mean, you were getting into downhill at the time, but if you look at what we were riding in the late 90s, we were riding like kind of crappy tracks that were kind of like bush league, built in the bush, right? Or we were riding like truck trails. So the trails we were riding just weren't that good. The bike park hadn't evolved. So as mountain biking, you know, climbed and hit its pinnacle in the 90s, because mountain bikes were cool. They were new. You could get suspension on them. But were they really that good? No. Were the trails we were riding in the 90s really that good? No. So the sport kind of had to like regroup. It kind of had to take a step or two back to take a bunch of steps forward. The bikes had to get better. The trails had to get more fun and better to ride. They kind of just had to get their stuff together. And that's where I just think like they had such a peak in the 90s of everyone bought a mountain bike because it was so cool to have a mountain bike in the 90s. But I don't think a lot of them came back to buy a second bike or a third bike. I'm sure a small percentage of the core enthusiasts did. So it was kind of a bit of a bubble, like not an inflation bubble, but just a trendy bubble of mountain bikes were so cool and so trendy, but they needed to reset itself. And nowadays you look at core mountain bikers and they'll buy a new bike every 2 or 3 or 4 years. That just didn't happen a lot in the 90s. And people just kind of sat, and then some people just got out of the bikes, and then it just had to reset and regroup itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's really cool insight. And there was like global recessions happening and things like that. So people maybe tightening budgets and going, hey, we tried this mountain bike thing. It's not as mainstream as we thought. You know, things like Mountain Dew pulling out and all those, you know. And then the Norbers, you said you saw the downfall of the Norbers. Like, what happened there? So the North American racing, because when I got there, it was still had a chance, and then they just drove it into the ground, I guess, or it got driven into the ground.
2 things: Lance Armstrong and sponsorship. So Lance Armstrong was winning the Tour de France, and Norba was part of USA Cycling. So Norba was the National Off-Road Bicycle Association, which then was part of USA Cycling. So USA Cycling had road cycling, which was just exploding because of Lance. So sponsors started pulling out of mountain biking, and then road cycling was just elevating. And Norba just finally said, we're good. So that's the simple aspect that I saw.
That makes sense. And I overheard some people that worked for the organization say, like, there were certain things they weren't helping the pros with, and maybe charging too much for pit space and making it difficult for the teams to want to come.
Totally.
And then they would say, but the pros are a small portion of who's here. We're here for the amateurs. I was like, I don't want to be silly, but the reason the amateurs also come is to see the pros, and they aspire to be the pros. So you should look after the pros. And the minute one vehicle leaves the paddock, the next one thinks, is it worth going? And then the more the pros weren't there, It's like, okay, but then the amateurs stopped going as well. So that was a small contributing factor, but that's how I saw it. I was like, I don't know. I think you should look after the pros. The more pros are there, the more credibility the event has.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's well said. So well said. And, you look at some of the big festivals, right? You look at Crankworks, you look at Sea Otter, they're all doing really good. Would they do that good if the pros weren't there as well too? And would some of the other companies go if it was just an amateur only festival, So I think there's a huge opportunity here in the US for festivals, for mountain bike racing. There's some good stuff going on with the US Pro Downhill Series, it looks like.
Yeah.
But you gotta have that mesh of that blend. But I'll tell you this, and outdoor events are thriving here in America. I know that. They are thriving. You just go to concerts. I mean, forget that Taylor Swift girl, but you just go to any concert nowadays. Like, I'm a big Metallica guy. Do you know what it costs to go to a Metallica concert at a stadium nowadays? It's insane.
No. What does it cost?
People want to be outside, like $400.
Jeez,
people want to be outside. They want to enjoy life, and especially active people. You can provide some good opportunities. And where better to spend a weekend than a ski resort during the summer? I know I'm totally biased, but I'd way rather go to Vail during the summer than the winter. And I'd way rather, go to Park City or Whistler or, Mount Snow, Vermont or Mount St. Anne, Quebec, Canada. Like, those are just awesome places to go. I mean, you could go to like a big amateur motocross race here in America. They're still getting hundreds, if not thousands of riders. So it can be done. It'll just take the right combo of promoters, but it takes money to do it too at the end of the day, right? Like, it takes money.
Well, you've always got to follow you got to follow the money, don't you? And that's I don't know what the core fan says, and maybe we can clip this and it's a comment. Like, I see that with Crankworks. I did a lot of work with him with the commentary, and I was a big promoter of this series, and I still am. I just find it challenging when not all the pros are there, so then I'm less interested in watching. So does that mean the broadcast, like, you need to find a way to entice the pros to be there, and that's what like they do now with this US series, is bringing back US Open, and it's a passionate guy, Clay Harper, and saying like he knows how important it is. The reason the US Open did so well in the previous times is the prize money. So that was cool, but they looked after the riders. Like, they provided lunch, and like they clearly worked with a team, so it was credible to be there, and it was credible to go win the race. To get a US Open podium, like, that meant something. So they looked after the pros that way, and that's, I think, how you can do it. And then the outdoor festival thing is a cool idea, and I don't think anyone's quite done it. Is it possible to have music concerts at the same time, so the people that come into the World Cup have that to say, okay, we're taking our families, but there is something for everyone, because dad and the son want to go watch the downhill, mom and the daughter are like, there's nothing to do up in this town, but maybe there's a bit more festival style thing,
Well, I think the ski resorts are awesome. I mean, so Snow Summit in Big Bear, 3 summers ago, I took my daughters downhill mountain biking. So I have 5 daughters. I'm a dad of 5 daughters.
You what? Best thing. That's amazing. 5.
Yeah, 5 daughters. They're awesome. And they all ride bikes. None of them are super competitive. We got some basic hardtail bikes, but we were on a summer vacation. I live in Texas now. I don't live in California. And we go to Big Bear, and my good friend Ryan Wormsbecker runs the bike park up in Big Bear at Snow Summit. And so I take my 4 older girls, but my youngest was only like 5 or 6 at the time, but they have trampolines there for her. They have rock climbing walls. They have zip lines. They have summer tubing. So the ski resorts are getting it. Back to your point, or your question about what happened with the industry, going downhill, was the ski resorts really needed to figure out summer revenue, which of course a big part is mountain biking. You go to Snow Summit nowadays, they run 2 high-speed lifts. They'll have a 30-minute wait in the line, because they've really figured out, no joke. So back in the day, remember, they'd run 1 lift. Now they run both high-speed lifts. They got trails all over. But at the bottom, they have rock climbing, and they have a beer garden. They have they're grilling food up at the top and at the bottom. So these resorts, they're there. They're primed for it. They've really figured that out, which is cool. I love to see that. So I have a question for you, because you're a little bit closer to it than I am. And maybe there's some guys listening to this that might get mad at me, but why don't pro downhillers race more? There's only 8 World Cups, 7 World Cups, 1 World Championships, your country's national. I mean, does Luke Bruni race more than 10 times a year?
Well, at a high level, probably not. I mean, he was at the Euro Champs now, so he might do the national champs. There's the Euro Champs. There's a preseason. To be honest, like if you're not sort of forced to by your team, then what is it worth the admin and the pressure and the risk?
Yeah.
To ride at that level for what? What's the payoff? Same as Greg. Like, it's no surprise. I think the older you get, it's like, well, you pick and choose when to peak.
Yeah.
The youngsters are still hungry, like they're trying to prove themselves. Like, to me, don't the older guys have more to lose at a smaller race than gain? What have they got to gain?
Yeah.
Like, you rock up at a smaller race, you're a little bit conservative because you don't want to get hurt because you're preparing for Worlds. And then people are like, why'd you get fifth? It's like, well, I don't know, it's a prep race. So to answer your question, like, they don't race more because there's not enough high-level races that they're incentivized to do and that the teams think that there's reason to do it, credibility to do it. Like when I raced, we did the Crankworks Festival because the team invested in it. So then that, yes, it got me bonuses, but it got me good standing with the team if I did well. I got a podium. They were happy. That was good for contract renewal. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but you need bigger, high-level, credible races, and you need the teams to invest, but you need the organizers to realize we need to basically beg, borrow, and steal to get the teams here. And that's why I think you're missing it. Like, Innsbruck used to have a better downhill. Now, that's not their flagship event. They do the slopestyle. My question is, but why not make the downhill unique? Why not get more riders there? And then you would have people racing more often, and we would tune in. Like, wouldn't you? I mean, depending on the lineup.
It's a lot of catch-22 and chicken before the egg thing, right? Like, you gave all those scenarios of, do the teams invest? Does the promoter invest? The riders, I totally get your point on the riders. Do they want to risk it? You got to put all those pieces together. And I'm sure Crankworks seems like they have the platform to do that. That Canadian Open DH track looks rad.
Insane. So cool, right?
Rumor has it they might be getting a World Cup in the future. I don't know if that's true
heard, or not. But we've heard it for 15 years. I just hope it becomes...
really? Okay.
Hey, but that's...
I heard that new track was part of the reason why, though.
Yeah, makes sense. It'd be really cool. Yeah. I mean, conspiracy theories and rumors are just false until they're not, right? So, you had a good track and you had a good rider list and people tune in.
Yep.
And like you say, so they do have the recipe to make it good. And sometimes scheduling is a challenge, and UCI and Warner Bros. Now, I guess, own the schedule a bit, right? They seem to have the power on the schedule. I'm not in those rooms. I don't know how that works. So you got to fit in with the schedule. And you need these venues to have basically tourism money, from what I can gather, to take the risk to put on the event because it's costly. So you've got all those contributing factors.
Have gone way up.
But and you can't just suddenly get 16 World Cup rounds because the teams can barely afford 8 now. Like, that's their budget. So if you go 16, you almost double the budget. But I think 10, 11, I think you should easily be able to do 10 and make it work for organizers as well as teams, right? So that would be cool. But that's maybe why downhillers don't retire so early, because they're not as burnt out. You got motocross, supercross riders. I don't blame Villapoto, Dungey. They're like, well, I got cash for the rest of my life. What's the point? I'm burnt out. That's not a grueling industry.
It is interesting, though. I mean, look at Tomac's into his 30s now, and Justin Barsha, Ken Roxon, Jason Anderson, Malcolm Stewart. There's a whole bunch of guys that are into their 30s now, and they're still racing. But back to the point of the downhill guys, as we're discussing this, I mean, if the teams and their sponsors, which are mostly bicycle OEMs, aren't saying, we need more exposure, we need you to be in the limelight more. I mean, I've worked in marketing most of my life, back to when we had Crank and why we started the Crank race team. I don't get how they can justify, I mean, I know it takes a lot of money, but 8, 9, 10 races of exposure a year. Like, if you look, and I know it's a cost thing, right? So, okay, how much are you paying? How much exposure are you looking to get? And I don't know how they go to the bosses and go, okay, we're going to go spend $1 million on our team budget this year, which some of the bigger downhill teams are close to that. And we're going to get 10 races of exposure. I don't know.
No, I hear you loud and clear. And I think the salaries wouldn't really go up much. There's only a few riders that could maybe demand more if you say, hey, we suddenly got to do 20 races. It's like, no, dude, we pay you year round. Yes, we pay you to train. Now social media is a thing and all that. But you're right. Like, they should get creative with the budget and hopefully do more. But I think
the
I think it's
guys
down to money
disappear.
again. It's down to
Yeah.
money again. It's
It
probably, I don't know how much it is a weekend, 20 grand a weekend to go to a race, maybe. You got your mechanics, you got your food, you got your accommodation, travel there and back.
At least, yeah.
So if it's a foreign race, like, it's way more.
Yep.
So
yeah,
there's probably not a team that's putting $1 million in, I would guess. Maybe half a bar, plus they got, maybe, but they've also got the co-sponsors, I guess, inclusive of salaries. They probably have to these days. Fair enough.
Specialized is one of the teams, and I'm not trying to get into anyone else's business, but I ran a Supercross race team for a little while too, and just knowing how it works. But Specialized is one of the teams that they don't have a tire sponsor because it's their own tires. I don't think they take any money from Shimano or SRAM, which are typically two of the big other sponsors. So components and tires. So I'm saying they are putting that in.
Oh, and gear. And gear
now too.
Yeah, true. So fair enough. Then your guesstimate's probably way closer to mine. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Totally.
Yeah. But anyway, so I have a question for you. Any other thing on the Crank Racing team and all that, or you want to start talking about nowadays stuff?
No, man, we'll relate it back to nowadays. I mean, I got lots of questions, but I think you summed it up great, and I think it's a epic lesson in history of downhill. But yeah, talk to me like your view on nowadays racing, bikes, people, gear.
Yeah.
How the sport's grown, not grown.
I love downhill racing, probably as much as anyone still. The one thing that I've struggled with that I would like to get your opinion on, or other people can comment, and this is going to make me sound old, but a bunch of clips have come out lately, and I've had opinions on this before, but of the 2001 Worlds, you talked about Greg's crash at Vail, and the track is whatever, and the skinny bars and the 26-inch wheels and the suspension that probably wasn't the best, open bath and all that stuff. But the track was mostly out in the open ski slope areas. And the thing that I always felt was a struggle that downhill is going to have from a viewing standpoint is when you're racing in the trees 90+% of the run, you're in the skinny trees. If you're there and you're a spectator, you can see them for what? 5 seconds, 10 seconds they come by. When the track, and I know that's where a lot of the more technical terrain is going to be that they want to challenge guys. And I don't know if that's what the normal rider rides, so they want to show that. But I've always just felt that, and Leger used to have a lot of that, the stuff up top that was high speed, out on the open ski slopes, really fast. The spectators could watch a large section. Also easier, I think, for the cameras to film because they could film a longer section versus in a tight tree stuff where the camera can only film for 5 or 10 seconds, the spectators can only film for 5 or 10 seconds, and the riders can only go so fast. I prefer to see it out. The guys going, it's downhill. And I know originally it was created to follow downhill ski racing. And again, I don't want to be the old guy and say back in my day, but I want
back in your day.
I want to see the guys go fast. And what they're doing next to those trees is borderline insanity. They have to pad every one of those trees. And I know the stuff that could happen is not pretty, but I think that perception of speed and being able to actually see it is an area where the sport could improve. Back to the Leger thing, a lot of my friends who aren't in mountain biking but know that I love mountain biking. One of them, a memory just popped up from Leger 3-4 years ago. I think it was Emery. His run at the top was going so fast. A friend of mine posted it on my Facebook wall. I was like, dude, have you seen this? He doesn't know anything about mountain biking, but he was the average Joe that could watch that and go, dude, that guy's going so fast. He's hanging it out. His bike's swapping. Not that they don't go fast through the trees. I know they do. And Emery's run there in Val di Sole in the wet was insane. It was. But to the average person, they can't tell. You can tell.
Yeah, that's
Win
fair
can tell.
point.
I can tell. But I think to grow it, they got to have certain parts of it to where my buddy who doesn't know anything about mountain bike, but he's a motorcycle guy. He's a Harley guy. He's like 300 pounds. Could watch that and go, dude, that's rad.
Dude, I think you've hit the nail on the head because there's a lot of conversation now with the broadcast getting taken over and we're trying to show full runs and they're trying to go to a 3-minute track basically to condense it down for the broadcast. So then there is room for the tracks to get faster, but they're often making it faster in the trees, which adds a level of danger. So I think you've hit the nail on the head. Like, do you remember the old track in Vermont?
Mount Snow, my favorite.
I mean, one of my favorites. And we used to hurtle down there. It was the type of terrain you could because of like the undulations and the rocks, and
Loved it.
It was technical in its own way. But you're right, there should be a level of like who's willing to go fast. It's downhill. Plus, there's the technical side. And Dora has some really fast bits, but it's still kind of in the trees. But you're whizzing by them, so you'll see Worlds this year. That new track has some sections where you're like, I think anyone could watch it and go, holy hell, they're going way too fast in that area. And I think you're right. There should be some more ski slopes and like fadeaways. And like you say, Amory's Run, if I remember correctly, is the old Leger track. And there's a lot of old slope grass, like ski runs and stuff. So yeah, I think that's a really good point and something to sort of give feedback to say, is there a way to increase that? Like the fast open stuff, and not lose the technical side that's also downhill.
Totally. Well, and if you have that variety too, if you could put that variety in one course, that's pretty cool, right? Like, and then you look at sector times, which I love. We're doing more and more with sector times. That's always been really cool. I remember Dan Brown with the Athertons pointed that out some years ago, and him and I were talking about some stuff. He's like, we need to do more with the timing and the technology and breaking down where the guys are doing that. That's really cool. You see that a lot in Formula One and MotoGP. So, and you could have it like, here's the tree section, here's the open section, whatever. You could do that. But no, I mean, what the guys do nowadays, like you can't even compare what they do nowadays compared to what, Kavarik and Rennie did back in the 90s and Waddell and Rando. The bikes are so good. The 29-inch wheels, that helps a ton. It's just crazy to see someone like Greg on an old 26-inch bike, and not even that long ago on a Santa Cruz, and the wider bars, which I think Gwyn gets a little bit of credit for going wider bars and kind of bringing some of that moto straight wider bars in there is really cool. And the frames are so good. I mean, all the manufacturers are building such good downhill bikes. I'm stoked to see Yeti's coming back in with a downhill bike. And I think the sport's great. I love it. I want it to be even better.
I got a question for you. So obviously there's new formats that they're trying, whether it sticks or not. They said they were going to try new stuff.
Yep.
Do you think a 30-man final is healthy for the longevity of the sport or unhealthy?
I thought about that exact thing. I actually had some road time the other day, and I listened to some of Bernard Kerr's podcast, and you guys were talking about that from like a year or two ago. And I remember he brought up a good point of like Win Masters, who's someone who's super talented and all that. He wouldn't get into a ton of those finals, but Win's an incredibly talented guy and wherever he's at in his career. And I look back on it with us, like at some of those races, would Kavarik have gotten in the final early on? He would have been out of the final. Like, I don't even know if he qualified top 30 at Squaw to get in there. But then on the flip side, from a business standpoint, I get it. I get that, hey, we're running a business. We want to show every single rider. I think you made the exact point of we don't want to miss a guy's fast run because he qualified 56th and we can't film every single guy. I can remember when they would film every rider coming out of the gate and every guy going across the line, I think for that exact reason, just to say they didn't miss someone. Is there a better way? I have a couple opinions. I'm going to say one that I'd like to get your opinion on. I'll say that one after, but how do you filter them? How do you bring the best to the best? How many people are signing up for a big World Cup? Like, how many people sign up for Fort William? How many sign up for Val di Sole? How many sign up for Andorra? Like 100 plus men?
Yeah. There's times when it's 180. There's times it's 110. Whoa. So there's plenty. Yeah.
And I remember when there was 200. There were times when we had 200 people.
Yeah, exactly. Back in the day.
Which sounds
it's too
great.
Many. It's too many.
Sounds great on paper. Like, oh, that's great. Our sport's so healthy. We have 200 people. But it is too many. Back to your thing about riders not showing up to races, I kind of look at that and go, okay, how do you create a feeder series? But how do you give people exposure and make it worth their time? I don't know if that IXS series is still going in Europe, which has always been pretty cool for them to do that. Props to IXS for spending that and the guys that go and put on all those races, which is great. But it's not anywhere close to a World Cup. Like, could you have the feeder series be at the World Cup the weekend before? Like, okay, this weekend before the World Cup is the feeder series, whatever you want to call it. And you want to know what? The top 20 from here get to go to the World Cup next week. So then you bring it down to, say, 60 or 80 that get to the World Cup, which is probably manageable. And then you can knock it down from there. I think if you had a smaller field entering the World Cups, I think that provides value because, again, it's back to the sponsors, right? Without the sponsors paying for this stuff, the racing does not happen. People aren't showing. I mean, you'll have some guys that show up and race for free, and obviously I'm the prime example of how little, the guys on our team raced for. But how do you get the guys to still show up and develop them to come in through? I mean, are the guys that are developing that are outside the top 100, are they the guys that are going to be on the podium later? I don't know. You can get some of those weird stories that can't happen. And does it having 30, like where do we lose riders? If we only have 30, do we lose a Chris Kavan?
Yeah, that's my question is, just as a devil's advocate, is yes, I think you can argue there's too many riders and you can tighten up the pits. And I agree with that on the business standpoint. Like I do ask the questions and chat to some guys in the know or working there just to say, okay, what's your goal? What's the red tape? What's going on there? And too many riders at the race is one. And I can agree with that. I just think as a devil's advocate, you could have the danger if you make the number, say 30, which has just become the number after the semi-final idea, right? Say going forward, you might lose the 35th to 60th guy who could be the next potential and a really cool name. But your goal is to lose from 100 to 180 maybe, fairly. To say, hey, it's an elite sport. Yeah. We're going to allow about 100 people to enter. Like in surfing, there's a way to qualify. So you need to...
Yep.
But first, I think you need the qualifying series, the rules. Is there protection? And I'm at the point, like I'd rather be more conservative and say, let's have 40, 50 in the final for a year or two just to start ironing out, decreasing the number so we don't lose people. We don't lose the interest for some teams, and all that. So that's where I'm at, is I'm also wary of losing these people that could be big names, but also you've got to respect the business, you've got to respect the broadcast. And I just think there's some compromise on either side to maybe have a bit more. That's my personal view, wrong or right. There's a way to whittle it down, which I've spoken about, the LCQ, and I'm sure that's probably going to happen on some level. And that's where I'm at, exactly like you. And that would be so cool if IXS was named one of the feeder series and there's an event 2 weeks before, and if you don't have enough points and you knew about how to get points, like the top 10 are allowed to enter the World Cup, that's pretty cool, Then at least you have a road to get into the World Cup if they're going to minimize it. Yeah.
But then would those all be in Europe? What would happen to America, Australia, South Africa, and Asia?
No, well, there's the complication. I do think in other sports they have ways to qualify in different areas to get in. You're able to hand out a few cards at the new US series, and you have to have a system, a point system, which is obviously difficult to set up. But once it's up, it's cool. And you have injury clauses like Gwyn. I want to see Gwyn. So if he's lost points, like he's a former World Cup champion, he's exempt for a few years if they're going to take away protection. And that's the thing. Like I want to see him in the final, like you said.
Yeah.
There's certain names we still want to see in the final, even if they get 40th. Like what's his pace like at the moment?
You brought up a good point about golf, right? Getting your tour card, like keeping your tour card based off exemptions. So are they doing the semifinals this season? So they take the field from 115, 180 down to a semifinal group?
Yeah, currently, they are. They go to 60, and then 60. the 60, so 60 is like the old qualifying, but then they've added the semifinals. So then you race again. But as they've noticed, the challenge is Dylan Maples, I think, is a prime example, and there are many others. He qualified 5th in the first qualification. So then he had to go and do a semi again, but he crashed or got a flat. Wasn't protected, so he never raced the final. So they've seen it, and like I say, like there's guys doing a lot more smarter things than me with stats and all these things, and I just go devil's advocate. Well, I think it maybe could be more than 30. I think we're in a danger of making it too elitist at 30 too quick. We could get there eventually, but we need a system of cards and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it is the sport. I mean, so here in America in motocross, we kind of joke about the AMA, the American Motorcyclist Association. So like, is the organization, do they have their shit together enough to like handle all that, to coordinate all that? We're always afraid here in America with Supercross and motocross, rules and regulations. Like, is the AMA ready to handle all of that? Because that's a lot. That's more work. Who's going to handle that work, right? Who's going to handle managing that point system? Who's going to build that website, to track that software, to do all that? There's a whole nother level to that. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I like that they're taking it down, that they take 100 and whatever riders down to 60. I do like that. And then taking it down to 30. But you have 10 protected, top 10 in points, automatically make the final.
What, currently?
Yeah.
It's been a little bit complicated, and I know I do the review podcast, but there's certain from last year that get protection into the semis, and then there's tiny few that get full protection to the final. So they're really, really getting a easier go at it. And I don't think everyone agrees with the protection, but then you need the LCQ idea. Then you need to give the guys two shots to get into the final. So I'm like, take 30 straight to the final, and then have another 15 spots of those other guys that didn't make it.
Yeah.
You know, like from 30 to 60th or 30th to 80th or 30th, the rest of the field, and give another 15 spots. So maybe we have 45 in the final. Challenges broadcast. You've been in marketing, maybe. I don't know if you've chatted to Motocross, how that works. It adds time to the day, so that's a constraint from the organizers, which is fair. They got to run an event. There's juniors now. There's all these things. That's a whole nother topic if they should be on the same day or at the same event. Like, what other elite sport has juniors there? So, like, I'm going to get in trouble for that. But I'm just saying it seems to complicate the elite race. Yeah. So maybe we need to build time in the schedule earlier in the week for the juniors.
Yeah.
And then, you have, like, to me, like, I don't know, it's a cool number. Top 45, top 50 in the world raced. If you're there on site, there's not many riders on race day if there's only 30 practicing when you're there with your kid trying to show them what the sport's like. Yep. So anyway, it's just an opinion, neither wrong or right, but it's definitely a topic right now.
Yeah.
And I just don't know what the repercussions are if you go to 30.
I mean, the repercussions are, I think the best of the best are always going to show up. The best of the best. Like, if you miss qualifying at a couple World Cups, if you're that good, you're not going to quit. If you're going to quit, you won't be the best of the best later anyways, right?
Yeah, so fair enough.
I'm okay with that. Your other point, though, about having the juniors, I mean, Supercross has 2 classes. Motocross in America has 2 classes. MotoGP has 3 classes. Formula 1 has 3 classes, right?
Fair enough, yeah.
They all have 3 classes. MXGP nowadays, I've heard, is just insane. They have like 100 classes. I'm exaggerating, but I think they have like 5, MX1, MX2, EMX2, EMX 125, some Yamaha 60 class or something. So, I mean, you could do all that. And I like how you said you're not going to be popular with some of that stuff. I mean, you can make all that work, right? But you have to have the biggest show be the biggest show. And that's what they want. And I support that 100%. Does it mean they're doing it right? I don't know. But having the biggest show be the biggest show, and you and I just talked about the track to be the biggest show. I mean, I think, and you brought up Red Bull Hardline, I think, with a few people on podcasts. I think I've listened to too many of your podcasts and tried to piece all the pieces together of who you talked to about what. But, like, I like Red Bull Hardline because it's gnarly, because people look at it and go, holy mother of wow, you know? That's what downhill mountain biking should be. But I think the tracks need to get more spectacular. You know, I think the tracks.
But you can build safe spectacular. You can build safe spectacular. We've seen it at Darkfest. We've seen it at certain hard lines. You know, you've got to be aware of the wind. You've got to be aware of the conditions, and you've got to be. Maybe you've got to be able to make changes on the fly. Like maybe that jump, if it rains, is not going to be in the course.
Yep, because
you tell your riders you need to practice both. Like, that's complicated, but practice both scenarios. You know, we're trying to put on a show.
Yep.
I mean, they take diggers out to Supercross tracks if it gets too rutted and too gnarly, don't they?
Totally, yeah. They roll jumps and they make stuff not jumpable. Yeah.
That's like the other question I had. Like, when I think I asked Win about it, I was like, is there a point when it rains so much? I know it's a crazy amount of work, but if we just dug up a few berms, would we have more clean runs? Because if we had 2 clean runs out of the whole ladies field, like, that's not good for TV at all.
Yeah.
That product sucks, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So we could get into the weeds here, but maybe we should wrap it up before I get myself in more trouble.
Yeah, I'm not involved. I won't get in any trouble. I've gotten in some other trouble in the sport before that I won't bring up, but I got a letter from the UCI once. I'm pretty proud of that one. So
What for? For a condo?
I'll tell you offline.
Okay, wicked. Mate, if there's anything we missed, let me know. But this has been, what a blast from the past. And thanks for reaching out. Thanks for the support. I appreciate that you see the value we're trying to bring to the sport. Because I hope people realize, and the organizers, we're just passionate. We just Love it. Take the feedback, don't take it, use it, don't use it. We just want the sport to excel. And so do they. So does everyone.
Yeah. I mean, you're adding massive value to the sport, right? Like there's so much here. I mean, what have we talked about? Enjoy riding your bike, have fun, go racing, train hard, love what you do, fight for what you want, be grateful. I'm sorry, I don't know if it's Chris Ball or who's ever in charge of World Cups. That's what you want. Those are the stories that you want out. Like I just gave you 8 taglines that you should be putting in all your marketing campaigns and social media posts, right? Like that's what's rad about it. And podcasts do that. You and I have talked about you maybe doing more podcasts. And I know it's so hard to do it, but you add a ton of value, dude. Like you telling these stories and building it up, you only want the best. That is great. And I know I've talked about Supercross a lot. Props to Feld, props to MX Sports and Supercross and Motocross. They have really engaged the media. They've allowed them to do a lot more, riders doing vlogs. They've really opened that up. Because when people are watching, and Bernard said it, and I agree with him 100%, him posting his race run with GoPro, that just added value to the World Cups. So you're adding value. The riders, media adds value. So keep it up, my friend. Keep it up, my friend.
Bro, thanks so much. I really appreciate that. And let's try keep adding value, and we'll keep some of the naughty stories for offline. That was Mark Rodgers. Even his dad started Crank, and he had the Aussies just ripping through America and the world. So, dude, thanks to you, and props to your family. That's really cool to see the passion that went in. And to the listeners, you might have heard some of my ramblings, so apologies, but I am just passionate. I want that World Cup series just to flourish, but I'll be there covering it, whether it's 10 riders or 500 riders. I love it. And for all the props on YouTube, make sure you do subscribe. If you haven't, it goes a long way. So, till the next one. Peace.
See you guys. Thanks.